Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome back to the show. We are so excited to have our next guest joining us, Joseph Werner. Yay, he's back. He's a owner and family therapist at Child and Family Consultants based out of Melbourne, Florida. He's back today to talk more about the work he's doing with families and children, I should say. And you've been in business for what, over 31 years?
Child and Family Consultants has
Ah,
been helping children and families in Brevard County and East Central Florida for over 30 years now.
Amazing. Well, thank you for being back here and joining us. Let's tell everyone how we can find you, childandfamilyconsultants.com, and tell us a little bit about your practice, please.
Well, at Child and Family Consultants, we work with children as young as infants. Sometimes I can hold them in my hands. They're just medically stable, but they're that young. And then we work with our preschoolers and our school-age kids, teenagers, and even some young adults. And the children and young adults coming into our office are dealing with all kinds of issues, everything from autism spectrum disorder to
Yeah.
attention deficit disorder, learning disabilities, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome. We also have quite a few kids who come in with mental health disorders, kids with anxiety, depression, eating and feeding disorders, and so forth. And we have occupational therapists and speech therapists who are not only working with the kids, but we're also dedicated to really working with the families and the caregivers of the children too. And that's hence our name. It's Child and Family Consultants, because we are a big believer in trying to help parents and caregivers both understand their kids, as well as facilitate the relationship between the parents, caregivers, and their kids. And also when kids graduate from the program here, we really want parents to be good problem solvers, so
Hmm.
that as the kids get older and different issues and expectations occur, the parents understand enough about their kids and the communication is good enough between them and their kids that they can work through and resolve any issues that might come up in the future.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for being here, for joining us. Always great topics of conversation. And let's talk, obviously, about you were mentioning computers, tablets, TV. What's all the distraction today?
Well, today's topic is these guys here, our iPads and our cell phones and
Yeah.
our electronics. One of the most common questions we get from parents and caregivers, is what to do about social media and gaming types of issues, and how can they set boundaries, and what are realistic boundaries for their kids, and also is social media and gaming and internet activities, are they really as dangerous or as
Yeah.
worrisome as sometimes you hear about in the media? And typically too, a lot of the parents and caregivers are already kind of feeling a little bit overwhelmed from everything else going on in their lives, and now trying to deal with this issue of social media and gaming also seems just one more thing which is they're concerned about and they want to deal with, but also just leaves a lot of questions on their part. And of course, certainly my parents never had to deal with whether I was going on Instagram
Yeah.
or social media sites, or and so this most parents now are also dealing with something that probably they and their parents didn't have to deal with
Yeah.
when they were younger. And just to give you some, to try to give some perspective to this. Social media and gaming and so forth, they're not inherently evil. They're not inherently something which is going to destroy the minds of our kids and our teenagers. However, um, the way we describe it here as a child and family is really the charms and the harms of social media, gaming, and internet access, because there are real world consequences to what's basically is a new cultural phenomena. I
Yeah.
mean, the access to social media and gaming and so forth is it makes as big an impact as television entering our lives and computer entering in our lives. And there is some suggestion that all of the time that kids are spending on the internet really is having an impact in kind of rewiring their brains and how their brains understand the world, and how these kids then can interact and communicate with peers and adults. And as I was saying before, there's it's important to recognize too that there are some positives here. There are some
Yep.
kids who can make connections with other kids who are like-minded, who are friendly, and they can feel support from other kids. Just as social media issues can lead to things like anxiety and depression and even
Oh, yeah.
self-harm, also there are kids that can go online and they can find support groups, and they can meet with and talk with other kids who are dealing with some of the same issues that they are, and they can feel a sense of connectedness that way. And so there is a benefit from a social community standpoint too. And of course, if you've got relatives around the country, or your friends move away,
Yeah.
you can stay in contact with people too. And even when it comes to things like gaming, sometimes
Yep.
we all need a little distraction
We do. Guilty.
from
Yep.
things, right? And we'll talk a little bit about the kinds of distraction that gaming provides, but we all need a break sometimes. And some of the apps and games on that we find on the internet give us an opportunity to do that. I've also had kids tell me that sometimes they feel more connected to other kids when they're playing Minecraft on the internet with them
Yeah. It's
than
my
they
kids are 5 and 7, so
do.
they're in the height of all
Yeah,
that, the Fortnite and I'm Roblox, and I'm like, what is happening? And there's so much time spent on it, and it's like, what are the
yes,
side effects? I mean, my son has neck problems now from looking down on the iPad. I took him to the doctor
yeah,
last year, and they said she's like, it's probably from iPad use. I'm like, what? Let alone their
yeah.
eyes. I mean, there's so many things we don't even realize.
Yeah, there are connections. One of the big factors is that when kids are on their screens all the time, what they're not doing is they're not going outside and playing, and they're not doing all that physical work. They're not meeting other kids eye to eye. They're not having to deal with choosing up
Yeah,
sides and making games and making rules as they play. And in addition to that too, sometimes adults we worry so much about our
yeah,
kids and on our kids' safety that sometimes we wind up hovering so much over our kids. And then you get the terms helicopter parents or lawnmower parents who are paving the way for their kids, that we've to some extent we've unintentionally kind of taken away time that kids were spending outside, and we've unintentionally given them, making them very vulnerable
yeah,
to all of the internet and media stuff that occurs when they're using screens. There's some indication that the between kids between 8 and 18 these days are spending 7.5 hours each day
what?
on their screens.
Wait, how much?
7.5 hours on their screens in the course of a day.
Yeeks.
Now, that seems huge, but there's also a study that shows when you ask adults how much time they're spending on their screens, and if you put a little app on their phones which actually records, most adults
Mm,
underestimate greatly the amount of time they're spending on their screens too. So we're all kind of at fault here. The
yep,
problem is that our kids and our teenagers are at a stage in their life where their brains are much more under construction.
yep,
And because those brains are under construction, they're much more um, uh, potential harm, because the way the games and the social media are set up, they're set up to be irresistible.
yeah.
They're set up so that kids are going to want to come back. And of course, people don't realize a lot of times, especially kids, are not going to really appreciate, how there's an addictive quality to what they're getting on the social media and through their gaming and so forth. But just to give you some sobering sort of background, is that um, the rates of mental health issues for teens have increased tremendously. The the between 13 and 19 years of age, um, the number of girls reporting anxiety and depression between 2010 and 2020 went up 145%. And just as significant is that the number of boys that expressed either depression or anxiety between 2010 and 2020 went up 161%, which is unbelievable. 40% of teenagers in 2021 reported that they were feeling depression or anxiety or even had suicidal thoughts. So 40%, that means if you had a high school of 1,000 kids, 400 of those 1,000 kids have felt anxiety, depression, or even had suicidal thoughts. That's basically a health crisis that is part of our homes, our communities, and even our country. Now, the reasons for a lot of this tend to make sense, and it's because it's the way these games and social media are designed. They're designed to pull us in and keep us there. I'll give you kind of an example. Let's say you were teaching your child how to play a game of chess or even Monopoly. All right. So those kinds of games, and very rarely do you ever hear of a kid who's addicted to Monopoly or even addicted to chess, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you got kids who really love to play, but you never hear anybody really say that they're addicted to these games. And that's because these games are designed to be able to, well, you really have to think about it. You got to work. You got to think about what's your next move going to be. What are the other players doing? You're also playing these games for the most part with somebody else right in front of you. You're playing chess across the table, another kid across the table from you, or you're playing Monopoly with 3 or 4 other kids. So you have this whole type of social connection going on as you're playing the game. But these games don't give you an immediate bell or a whistle or a point every time you make a move. All right. They don't have the strong colors and bright lights and electric energy that's kind of on the screens. The other things that these games have, and I'll use a game called Candy Crush, not necessarily to emphasize that one over any other ones, but just as an example, a lot of people have had some familiarity with that game. So, Candy Crush is set up so that the game boards are tough, but they're not too tough. They're set up so that if with a little bit of effort, with a little bit of practice, you can score points. You can see yourself passing boards and getting higher scores, and then you get all these rewards associated to it. You get extra moves, extra pieces that help you win the next board, and so forth. So you're constantly getting all of this gratification. The other part about it is that once you get a sense of how the game is played, you don't really have to work that hard. And that's one of the reasons why games like that can be a distraction, because your brain can work just a little bit, but your brain really doesn't have to work as hard as saying playing a game of chess or checkers or Monopoly. So it's very easy to get into these internet games. They give you lots of rewards, and they're constantly giving you more rewards. They constantly tell you more rewards are coming. They're constantly giving you little challenges. And these are all the things our brains love to have. And you don't really have to work so hard on them in order to be successful. And because they're so exciting and stimulating, the other thing that happens is that when you try to do other things are boring. It's boring to maybe play a game of cards or to think about going outside, for kids and I don't know, making a fort or something like that. When you can pop open your screen and all of a sudden you get all of this great feedback about these and strong visuals. And there are some kids, of course, that they just get so good at these games. These games become part of their identity. They see themselves as a gamer. And this is where they get success and even some joy in their lives.
And I just feel bad. Like my kids are 7 and 9, and they just feel like they want to watch all these gamers, the YouTubers, and the And I can't even think of the name. Oh my goodness, I'm drawing a blank. Some of them do really good thing, but they think, wow, he makes millions of dollars, and I'm Mr. Beast.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but
Yeah.
this is like, I want to be a gamer. I'm like, no, no, no. I'm like, these can't be a good career choice. So like, how do you stop it? I mean, we have to have some type of limitations.
Well, we do, and that's we're going to talk about that in a minute. I just want to
Okay.
mention one of the things about social media too, because you know one of the things that really happened back around 2010 or so is that our phones came out with cameras, and
Yeah.
at that point, kids could really take pictures of themselves,
Yeah.
and not only take pictures of themselves, but they can put them online. And then they started putting them online not only to get attention, but to basically get approval and validation about themselves and about everything they're doing. And again, the way our brains work is let's say you take a picture of yourself and you go to put that online. Now, what happens is the brain starts to produce a little bit of a chemical called dopamine.
Yeah.
Dopamine is what's called a feel good chemical. And dopamine is not just about somebody liking something you put on the screen, but dopamine is about the anticipation of a reward. So let's say that you put a picture of yourself on the internet, you immediately are getting it this dopamine drip just about the anticipation of somebody liking your picture or your content or making a positive comment about it. And then of course when somebody does make a positive comment, that gives you another dopamine drop, and then that hooks you into wanting to get that feeling again throughout the course of a day and throughout the course of a week. Now, the opposite happens too, though. If you put something out on the internet and all of a sudden, you know, somebody freezes you, or they block you, or they make a negative comment, not only don't you get the dopamine fix from that you would have got if somebody said something positive, but actually your brain decreases the amount of dopamine that you're producing. So you even get a dopamine drop. And in addition to that, the areas of your brain that are involved in anxiety begin to increase, because now you're like, well, why did somebody drop me? Why did they say this? Why did they freeze me? And so forth and so on. And you know, our teens are particularly vulnerable to this because you know that's the point that your life where more than any other time, you know, you're really looking for connections, and you want to feel like everybody else. You want to feel like all the other teens. You want to be part of the in group. And then when all of a sudden you're ostracized, or even worse, you feel shamed by something that somebody said, or cyberbullying and so forth. Now you're really looking at kids who potentially are really falling into anxiety and depression from these negative experiences. And of course, not all kids are as vulnerable, but there are definitely kids who have a temperament where they are more susceptible to anxiety. They're more susceptible to being isolated. They're more susceptible to feeling different than everybody else. They're more. It's more important for them to be connected to other groups. And when those positive things don't happen, these kids in particular can really crash from these negative experiences, and they're too young to understand about how, you know, their brains work, and how they are being put in a position where they're made to be vulnerable, and they're made to be addicted to try to get this type of input constantly coming in. So that leads us to, you know, what can you help, you know, parents and teenagers be able to do? And so a couple quick things is, one is we follow a lot of the guidelines from the American Academy of Pediatrics, and what some of those guidelines include things like, you know, really no screens before kids are 2 years of age, unless maybe
Mm-hmm.
they're talking to their grandparents or a parent who's out. Between 2 and 5 and 6 years of age, any of
Yep.
the screen time really should just be educational. And the key there is that the parent and the child are viewing together, rather than the child is on the screens by themselves. After the age of 6, you know, at the very most, kids should have 1 hour of screen time a day, and maybe at the most 3 hours on the weekends. We also suggest to parents that until kids are about 12 to 13 years of age, don't get them a smartphone. Just if you want them to have a phone, get them one of these phones that they can take calls in and out for safety and security reasons, but don't get them a smartphone. And I know that's going to be really tough, because if you have a 10-year-old who you tell them they can't have a smartphone, and they're going to tell you all 5 of their friends have smartphones, it makes it really tough on parents that, to continue to
Yeah.
say no. But there's really lots of good reasons to try to help them understand that, smartphones really aren't for them yet. And then we have to teach our teenagers, how to be aware. Like you were
Yeah.
saying before, we need to teach them that, their
Yep.
information is being pulled in by these companies and then being used back at them to keep them involved. That these people who are making millions of dollars as YouTubers, they're
Mm-hmm.
out there, they're performing. They're not just necessarily being themselves, but they're performing just like people on reality TV shows. They're not necessarily themselves. What we also have to do, though, too, is we got to get kids outside. We got to get them playing again. We got to get them being with their friends, being eye to eye with your other kids. And again, sometimes that's really hard for parents to set up all of these social connections and drive kids and so forth. But we need to help kids find ways through sports and music and art of making connections with their friends and their peers, because it's being out there one-to-one that children and teenagers really learn how to regulate their emotions, regulate their attention to task, that they learn how to deal with social situations. Texting somebody is not the same as trying to hold a back and forth conversation.
So
And we all
different.
know,
Yeah.
that people will say and do things texting that they won't do um, person to person and eye to eye. And so, we need to find ways of teaching kids. I remember a story from an 18-year-old girl who's felt like, adults were constantly criticizing her for what she described as a lack of self-control. And she commented that, well, it's not really fair that nobody ever taught her how to use social media or the internet, and now they're criticizing her for being on it too long and being too involved in it and getting too upset when things don't go her way. So we've really got to teach our kids about how to the pluses and the dangers of social media, and we have to try to monitor what they're doing. We've got to get schools involved. Schools have got to be no phone places. Kids put their cell phones, stay in their lockers or at least their backpacks. The phones don't come out. And we've got to really get our legislators to come up with reasonable regulations, because we know that the big companies like Meta and TikTok, these places are not going to regulate themselves. There's too much money that they make from bringing kids and teenagers into their systems and keeping them there. So we can't rely on them to regulate themselves, and so we've got to get our state and our federal governments involved. But everything starts, like always, it always starts in the home and in the schools and in the communities.
Well, in our last few minutes together, what else did you want to add? We have just, oh my gosh, 2.5 minutes left. It always goes so
Okay,
fast.
so
Go ahead.
the last thing I want to say is that there's an old expression that anytime you come up with a clear, simple, easy, straightforward answer to a complex problem, that answer is almost always wrong. So the dealing with social media and gaming, this is a complex problem. It involves kids, teenagers, and even involves adults. But we need to support parents. We need to teach our kids how to be able to use these electronic devices, which do have a lot of pluses. But if we don't teach them, and if we don't provide boundaries, and if we don't get adequate legislation, we're really we have a mental health crisis, and that mental health crisis is only going to get worse. And that's my story.
Well, I love your story. You always have something good to share. But let me just ask, in reality, in
Sure.
hindsight, with our children on these iPads, these computers, what we don't really know the true effect of how it's going to affect us yet, right? I mean, has there
Well, there's
been
still
studies? Has there
Oh
been
yeah, there's been lots of studies, which now we need more studies, but there have
okay.
been lots of studies which show that um, because these devices and the apps pull people in, get your brains to be connected to them, basically rewire parts of your brain, that they really are potentially dangerous, and
Yeah.
they lead to things like obesity and anxiety, depression, and so forth. So, we need a lot more studies, and we need to understand which people are more vulnerable than others.
Yeah.
But we know children and teenagers' brains are under construction, and they are much more vulnerable to this type of constant stream of information, and the sites are making themselves irresistible
Wow.
to kids.
Well, I know. I'm just waiting. It's like the doctor. See, we went to like the eye doctor maybe 3 years ago, and they said an hour. And now we went to the eye doctor a few weeks ago, and they said 20 minutes, like a day, is what they should be on. I'm like, what?
Yeah,
But they're learning and learning. It's just such a hard thing to
yeah,
do when you have the pressure of it all around us. Everything in moderation, I
yeah.
think, is a good thing. What do you think?
Yeah, well, that's always a good place to start. Everything in moderation. And the other thing is, adults also have to model good behaviors. I
True.
mean,
Ah,
sometimes
you're right. You can't be on the computer and
you,
phone. And
you,
yep.
you can't be, and sometimes I walk into a restaurant, or if you ever walk through an airport, the adults are on their phones, sitting next to the kids on their phones.
Exactly. Oh, you're
So,
right. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here again.
all
Would you
right,
mind sharing how we can contact you?
yes, you can call us at Child and Family Consultants. We're always open to phone calls. Our phone number is 321-768-6800. And we're also contact us through our email, which is childandfamily at cfl.rr.com, and all spelled out. That's CHILDANDFAMILY at
Perfect.
cfl.rr.com.
Thank you so much. Have a great day. Great discussion today.
You're
And
welcome.
we'll talk soon. Have a good one.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
Mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.